Carol, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Erling,
Here.
Commissioner Weeding,
Here.
Commissioner Walsh,
Here.
Commissioner Wilzak,
Here.
Mayor Hart.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dale Walsh, and we can go from there.
Hi, everybody, thanks for coming. If you think of a question, and if somebody is asking a question or we're speaking, there's a piece of paper over there, you can write your name on it, your question, or just raise your hand and I'll call on you if you have a question for Chris. This is Chris Mirabali. He's our CPA, the city CPA. He's from the firm of John Kasprick. And I'll just let Chris introduce himself, and Chris, if you don't mind, your background and
Good evening, everyone. I've been with our firm, John Kasprick Company. I'm a consulting manager. I've been with the firm since about 2014, so over 10 years. I work with a lot of different local governments, helping them on the consulting, maintaining their books, helping them with their audit requests, helping the local governments manage their cash flow, union negotiations, financial reporting, a variety of different tasks on the financial side of the client of our local governments. I work with municipalities, park districts, pension funds. That's the majority of their clients with those types of that we help with. We as a firm, we also work with townships, and that's the other ones that I have not worked on much, but local governments wise, municipalities, which includes villages and cities, pension funds, so police and fire pension. You guys don't have a fire pension, but you guys do have a police pension. Park districts, those are where I spend the majority of my time working. I work in consulting. I started working in both consulting and auditing. Now I just primarily work in consulting for local governments. You want me to
go ahead, whatever you want.
Okay, so I left copies of 2 sets of packets. One is the financials of the city through January 2025, which that is a larger packet, which would be stapled with a cover page, and then a larger packet, so it's about this. This report would be the first one, and it's my summary of the changes for the city through January 2025 compared to prior year and the budget. And then a separate copy of files that's 3 pages long that talks about the city's April 2020 interfund transfer. Give you guys a minute. Okay, so I will start by talking about the interfund transfer, and then I will go into the city's financials. If there's a question or something does not make sense as I'm going, please feel free to stop me and I'll try to explain it in a different way. So the document that is 3 pages long is the interfund transfer. What an interfund transfer is, when the city has different funds. Funds are like different houses. If one fund does not have enough money coming in to cover those expenses, it interfund borrows from another fund. It's cash flow shortfalls in the interim period. What happens is, when that happens, it creates an uncollectible receivable and payable. So what we did in fiscal year 22, which is the fiscal year ending April 30th, 2022, which has been audited, what the city did is it authorized a permanent transfer. What a permanent transfer is a paper entry. It takes the money that's being reflected on owed from Fund A and eliminates it from the amount that's owed from Fund B. All it does is it says, we are not going to collect this payable, receivable, and we are going to forgive the debt, because proper accounting says that if something is not going to be collected, you can't keep it on the books as forever showing it as a debt or receivable if it will never be collected. So what we did was we eliminated, forgave the balance between the water fund FICA fund, audit fund, liability fund, and general fund of that. What it effectively did is saying that the money that was owed between here and here is no longer owed. There was no transfer of physical cash. All it was money was being sent that was owed here, and it was a receivable on this side, a payable on this side. Okay, it's now 0 and 0. So if you go to page 1, on the report, you'll show how the water fund had a $5.2 million expense, and the combination of all of the other governmental funds was a $5.2 million revenue. It was a paper entry, no cash flow impact. Any questions on that?
And it's legal.
Yes, it is it's customary financial accounting principle to happen. When interfunds, there's not enough money in one of the funds to cover those expenses, like your audit fund, as an example. Your audit fund is funded solely by property taxes. If there's not enough property taxes to cover the audit bills, then it creates a interfund payable in which the general fund is paying for the difference. When that happens, the city has two options. They can continue recording a interfund payable for years and years and years, showing on the books that they have this uncollectible payable, or they can wipe it out. Proper accounting is wipe it out because you'll never collect it.
Chris, I have a question. By not wiping it out, would it show a negative impact on the city's overall image?
It will make it look like you guys are, that there are funds that are not operating correctly. That they owe large sum of money that will never actually be paid.
Okay.
If that happens, does that affect our credit rating? I mean, whatever that, how is that rating, how you do the bank rating? If that was happening, that would damage our rating or whatever system you guys use.
It would make it, it's not gonna hurt, in the long run, if it gets too exorbitantly high, yes, it will start impacting it, because what it will say in your footnotes is that you guys have debts that you guys are never gonna pay, and that you're still reporting all of these debts on the books. So it will have, in the long run, once the balances get larger and larger and larger, it will start to have an impact, because people will say, well, when are you gonna pay this? Even though it's not something you actually owe as a debt from the city whole perspective.
And is that another reason why to do this?
Yes.
From a financial point of view?
Yes.
In the back?
Are we in debt?
No, from a overall standpoint, the city is, as of January 2025, you have different funds. The general fund, as of January 2025, page 2 of the financial report, which is the bigger document, the city ended the account ended the month end January, so from May of 24 to January 25, the unending profit loss balance was a positive 400,000.
I have a question.
Mhm.
This is not the 23 audit.
Correct.
Where, is it done?
Yes, the 23 audit is complete.
So this is just like a
And
real
our
quick
financials.
look at, yeah,
Yes.
look at the books and give numbers.
There's
Yes.
a public hearing at the next meeting,
I just, okay,
or there's gonna be somebody coming to talk about that.
okay.
Are there any other questions on the interfund before I move to the actual financials?
Chris, I do. I don't know if you may have answered it. What's the difference between owing the city, between funds, and owing someone outside the city?
So owing interfund balances is just borrowing between different funds here in the city. Owing outside in the entity is you guys physically borrowed money from another entity, and that entity would, depending on how you guys structure that agreement, have the legal right to get that money from you guys. From a standpoint of interfund borrowing, there is no statutory rule, unless you're borrowing from your TIF or your MFT fund, there is no statutory rule to say you have to pay that money back. If you borrow from vendor A, B, and C, well, that vendor doesn't then have a legal right to go to court and says, they owe me X dollars, either they pay me, it doesn't matter where they get the money from, they owe me the money and they have to pay it. Where interfund borrowing, you can borrow from funds at any point and never have a legal right, statutorily wise, to have to pay that money back.
And it does an audit will reflect that and you get dinged on an audit?
And an audit, they will, if you get large interfund balances, the auditors will ding it, because on your books, what you are reflecting is saying that you owe a large sum of money that you'll never pay back, or that you are saying that you're borrowing that you're not paying back. It makes it look like you are not operating each fund independently of each other and to the best of its benefit. If it's not gonna be collected, it shouldn't be reflected on the books.
Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong then, there's no interest put on that money when it goes in and like from.
To my knowledge, I've never seen a single local government ever charge interest on interfund borrowing.
Okay.
You have the option if that is something you so choose, but doing this 10 years and all the clients I work on, I've never seen it done. Because ultimately, doing that, all it does is hurts the other fund, which then, from from a city-wide perspective, you're trying to make one fund profitable at the expense of the other fund, which doesn't, from a management standpoint, doesn't help the city as a whole.
And what happens if the commissioner doesn't want to give their budget
Give
to
the
the
money up.
general fund?
Well, it's not a budgetary impact. This has no impact on budget. This is solely a balance sheet item. This is balance sheet to balance sheet. So it's a balance sheet, it is not in any way, shape or form impact an income statement item from interfund borrowing. That has no impact on budgetary standpoint.
So this, to summarize what I understand here, this is just a common practice where most governments use to interchange the money that they need in a different categories.
Correct.
It's all their money.
Yeah, it's all, at the end of the day, city cash.
Thank you.
To pay the bills, to pay,
To,
Keep the city operational.
yes.
You're welcome.
Are we taking enough then to cover our bills?
Yes, so, let me back up. On a specific fund, yes, so the general fund, yes. If you go to, so I'm gonna move on to the financials.
Chris, can I get just a little bit more clarification, just in general? The practice of governments tapping into.
Interfund borrowing.
Borrowing.
Mhm.
Why does that usually occur? How often does it occur? Is it an indication of, what is it an indication of when that's occurring?
So, it usually happens when there are, the monies to have, so, you guys in here, Will County pays property taxes May through December. If you have bills in January, February, March, where there is not enough, from the previous time was not enough cash flow to create an excess, then you would be interfund borrowing to say, okay, a simple example, FICA. The city has a FICA fund. If the amount of which FICA is federal, Social Security and Medicare, so the city has to pay 7.65% of all employees' wages into, Social Security and Medicare. If the city levies property tax dollars to fund those items. But if you guys don't have enough of a levy to cover those items, then what ends up happening is someone has to pay for that difference of what is the FICA expense that you guys incur and the FICA revenue that you guys collect from property taxes. If it's not enough, then you have two options. You either interfund borrow, or you don't pay this required contribution of Social Security and Medicare that the city has to make it every payroll. So what you do is you go interfund borrow, and the general fund will cover that difference of what we collect, or the city collects in property taxes, and what the city pays out through payroll for FICA and Medicare.
And if you didn't have enough money in the whole budget, you would have to borrow.
Yes,
Do they have to pay their money back to, like, if the street department borrows from the water department? Do they have to put that back into their fund?
so, the city does not borrow from the water fund. All of the general fund operates fully to fund everything that it runs out of. Or, the general fund, the city's, what it collects in revenues in the general fund fully covers its operations. It does not borrow from the water fund. Because the water fund operates separately of the city, and the general fund, it operates at a cash positive, so to speak, number. Does that answer your question?
kind of.
Well, I think if I could summarize it, the water fund is a separate entity because the water fund you get specific bills for and that pays into that fund. So that's a specific category. All of the rest of the categories are what's, you have to pay for from everything you've gotten from taxes, et cetera. So the water fund is a little bit separate, but you would have to borrow money from the general fund to pay for the water fund if you didn't collect enough. So if we didn't charge enough on our water bills and it didn't pay for the water expense, we would have to borrow from the general fund. But generally, you try to allocate enough to make sure the bills that are being paid for water specifically cover the water. Is that correct?
So I think this might help a little bit. If we go to, on the financial statements, page 4 is all of the different types of revenues that the general fund has. So I've broken them down. The total revenue that the general fund has received through January 2025 is about $4.2 million. The budget of the general fund for the entire fiscal year is about $5.4 million. So as of January, the city has collected about 78% of what it is budgeted for revenue. Compared to January 2024 last year, the city had 3.8 million in revenue for the general fund. So between last year and this year, the city's general fund revenue has increased about by 300,000. If we go to page 6, we have through January 2025 about 3.8 million in expenses for the general fund, compared to a budget of 5.4 million, with prior year being 2.8 million. So the city, from a profit loss standpoint, we've collected 4.2 million, spent 3.8 million, so we have a $400,000 positive operational for the general fund. Compared to last year's profit and loss of about $1 million. Does that make sense?
Chris, on that line, I'm looking at you're looking at the total expenditures on page 6 in the middle of the page, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you mentioned the 4 million, that's the 3,781,000, right?
Yep, that's the January 2025 expenses through date.
And then the fiscal budget here is the 5,387,000.
Yep.
Yeah, and then what was the last figure you mentioned after that?
The 400,000 underneath that,
Oh, that's this one?
that's our profit loss, so our surplus. So the general fund has operated through the month of January at a $400,000 positive number.
Is that what's left to pay for the rest of the year though?
Well, you'll still be getting more money in, because
Okay.
every month you guys get sales tax, use tax, income tax. Those are all deposited into Illinois funds. So the city has two main bank accounts that cash flows run through. You have Illinois funds where you get all of your state revenues, so state income tax, sales tax, use tax, all of those. And then you have US Bank where all of the other types of payments. So anything you come to pay up at the window, those all run through US Bank. That's also where payroll is processed through, all the vendor checks are paid out of, but it's all paid out of there. But that is a combined, the account that has all of it. So water gets paid through out of there, general, payroll, everything is combinedly paid out of US Bank.
So would it be fair to say that this 400,000 is, we're 400,000 under the budget?
You guys are right now, from a budgetary standpoint, you guys have about, you've only expended 70% of your budget. So you have another 30% to spend of just on the expense side. You also have on the revenue side, you have another 23% to get of revenues that we anticipate by year end.
Okay, so the way I digest this is, we have 400,000 on just the expense side that we are in good shape on, because we're under what we had expected. And then we also got the positive from the income, is that right?
Yeah, that's,
Okay, thank you.
okay. Go ahead.
Okay, we got two big car dealerships coming Oh, I'm sorry, Jay, go ahead.
April 30th. So you guys have 3 more months. 3 more months of revenue and expenses to come in between now and April 30th.
You mean a month and a half, or mid?
Well, I'm going off
Oh, yeah,
of
oh, from this
these.
point in time, yes,
Yeah,
okay.
he only did it to January.
Yes, okay.
Okay, we got 2 big car dealerships coming,
Mhm.
gas station coming, and if everything was in hand to get the tech center coming, let's break that one later. We already know that the taxes are gonna be, I heard ballpark of $800,000 a year from the car dealerships, not counting the gas station, which they're saying that could be 200,000 to 400,000 depending on gambling and all that kind of stuff. Ballpark, no just a rough estimate. Now, when that comes in, where do they put that, where does that money go to for the city? Does it go into a fund, does it go to?
So the
How's that
dealership,
spread?
the dealership that's in the TIF district, so all that money would go into the TIF fund.
Okay,
So in compliance with the TIF Act, those will be separately reported as a separate fund, and all of those real estate taxes that come from the TIF will be deposited into the TIF fund. So, so that way everyone has.
so will that be eligible for the city to use if they have to, or no?
No.
So they can't use that?
TIF funds can only be used for TIF operations, but within the TIF Act, if the TIF district is a separate entity, so to speak, is a good way to think about it. But it's still a part of the city. So your police force still go and respond to items that happen in the TIF district. So you are within the TIF Act in compliance. You can use a portion of TIF funds to fund like a new squad car or administrative fees. Those are all eligible TIF expenses that you can charge from the TIF fund.
Okay.
I think you talk about sales tax also.
Yes. Now, in regards to sales tax for that are gonna happen with the dealership, that will all be run through the state. The state will cut the city a portion, and then the city has to cut its, under the economic development agreement, a portion back to the dealership. But in compliance with your economic development agreement, there's a cap on all of those items. If the city reaches that cap through property taxes, then it doesn't owe anything money back to the dealership, because once it reaches the cap, it is the cap. It is a cap of combined total of which you will reimburse the dealership for.
Question, when they buy the squad car out of this TIF money, is it true that that car can only go out of that, only work in that TIF district?
No,
It can work anywhere in the,
in the city, yes.
okay.
Because it is part of the police department assets, and they get the
So
money
it's
that
only-
they need.
It's not paying the full value of the squad car out of it, it's a proportionate, so.
No, it was paid for.
No, it's not. It's
No.
actually paid, the way it works is, however many percentage of the TIF district is in your city, which is 38%, you're allowed to pay that much of that vehicle.
Where did the rest
38%.
of it come from?
It either comes from the police
So
budget.
when we bought the one out of the TIF district.
We didn't buy one out of TIF, we bought a portion of it out of TIF, please let me finish.
I'm not,
And then the rest-
I gotta
okay,
move, I'm
all right.
sorry, I got a bad back.
I'm sorry, and then the rest came out of the administration of capital outlay budget. So the capital outlay budget was created at one time years back. We had a lot of confrontation between, commissioners on who owned what piece of equipment. Guess what, it's all the city money, so it's all the city equipment. So they took both of the capital outlays away from the streets and the water, created an administration capital outlay fund, which is approximately, I think, $150,000. So that way, when a piece of equipment is purchased, there was no arguing, it's the city equipment. So whenever you buy a piece of equipment or anything else, you're allowed to use 38% of the TIF money, because that's the percentage of TIF in our town, towards whatever purchase we make, as long as it's something that is used in that some way, shape, or form. If it drives through it once, it qualifies it. If it's used there to dig it up, it qualifies for it.
Thank you.
So, all the taxes collected, whether it's from food, tobacco, alcohol, gas, whatever, that's paid to the city monthly?
Yes and no, because you're combining all different taxes, so property taxes are paid between, because Will County controls when those are distributed. So Will County distributes that, because you guys have the majority of your money for property taxes come from Will County. We have a portion that comes out of Grundy County, but for the majority, it's gonna be Will. That is distributed between May and December. Will County will tell you exactly what days you will have that distributed to each of the local governments. Those are publicly available information that you can look up at any time as to how much each local government got in from Will County as a proportion of real estate taxes.
I believe that's on the website, right? The link to
There
the,
is some kind of sales tax, anything that we get from sales tax.
that we can click on.
I think it's the sales tax, I don't think
I
it's
think so.
property tax.
Okay.
You can look on your tax bill and it itemizes
That was-
everything.
Will count, yes, but that would not be, it will tell you what portion each individual is paying, but the portion that the city gets as a total, if you were looking to see what the city got as a total of real estate taxes from Will County, I would go to Will County, because it's a quick and easy, and it'll give you a breakdown, and it'll tell you what day the money was deposited into the city's bank account. In regards to sales tax, use tax, and, income tax, those are deposited monthly, and those are, you can either get those through the comptroller website, or I always prefer the Department of Revenue. There's a specific portal on there that's open to the public where it will tell you exactly how much each month the local government is getting in state income tax, use tax, and you can click on each one individually and it'll download that report. They'll give you every local government in the state of Illinois and what did they get in sales tax, income tax, excise tax, use tax, etc.
Kim, I think that's what you're.
There's also on the state Department of Revenue website is, it will tell you from an accrual standpoint what you've got. So it'll tell you that you could tie directly into the fiscal year end audited financial statements as to how much you get in state income tax, because it gives you a breakdown of on the accrual basis. Because as on the state website, it has both on the cash basis and a full accrual basis, so you could download that report to see what they got in the entire fiscal year for the 12 months, based on each type of income grouping. Now, the other items like for franchise taxes, permits and those types of things, those are not readily available on public websites. Those are coming in when they pay. Like your franchise taxes, those are when they send a check in. So like one of your guys' franchises, Comcast, they will send the city a check, and depending on the mail as to when the check gets received, will be when does that money get reflected in your guys' bank account, so to speak, on the financials. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no,
Do we have enough, to go through? Maybe if Chris continues through it, he'll answer a lot of questions
Can I ask
as we're
one
going.
question?
Sure.
So, there's this $9 million figure that's been tossed around. City has $9 million to spend. Where is it?
So the $9 million is in Illinois funds cash. So that is the balance that they keep at Illinois funds, because one of the things the city does so that way it can get the most bang for its buck, so to speak, is Illinois funds is paying about 5% interest. To my knowledge, there is no bank out there that's paying 5% interest. So what the city does is to maintain and get the most out of those dollars, they leave a large portion of its cash flow in Illinois funds. Because what Illinois funds does is, instead of it paying 5% on the ending balance at the end of the month, it'll pay 5% on every day the money is in the account. So if, let's say, we need $100,000, we can transfer $100,000 out, pay a bill, and then leave the rest of the cash in there, and it will still pay 5% on that cash balance every day. So on the financials, if you go
Yeah,
to.
where does it show it?
Yeah.
The number, 9 million. I want to see the number.
You won't see it at 9
If I can do
million.
you quick, on the Illinois fund, your balances in 19, 20, 21 were zero, cause that's when we were still trying to dig out of the hole. In 22, I believe the balance was 1.8 million. In 23, it was 2.8 million. 24, it was 4.1 million. And 25, it's actually 8.65 million right now.
How much
So-
is interest?
About 420,000 this year. And then the other ones are our IMED account, which has about 500,000 in it, and our standard working budget averages between $400,000 and $700,000, depending on the size of the expenses. So when you do the 8.65 and the 500 out of one gives you the 9.1, and you add another 400 to 500 out of the general fund gives you about $9.5 to $9.6 million in our accounts.
So, what you're saying is there's $9 million in the savings account somewhere, correct?
Yes, so
It could be used for anything.
if you go to page 21 of the financial statements, there is there are 3 lines that say Illinois Funds General, Illinois Funds Water, Illinois Funds Motor Fuel Tax. This is as of January 2025. The combined total of those 3 accounts is about $8 million. So we've got $4,766,000 and change in Illinois Funds General. Illinois Funds Water is about $2,471,000. And then Illinois Funds Motor Fuel Tax is about $1,517,000. So that combined total of those 3 lines is about $8 million as of January 2025.
Chris, can you go through it a little
So
slower?
that's, yeah, because I don't see where.
Alright, so I see the 4,766,000, what was the second one?
Illinois Funds Water, it's $2,471,294.
What page do you
Fund.
want,
Okay.
Chris?
Yeah, I know,
Page 21.
Got it?
Fund.
Yep, alright.
It's right there, second line under enterprise fund.
So the motor fuel tax is the
Oh, okay.
1,667?
It's just a line item.
It's a little higher, it's the 1,000,001.
1.517.
That combined total, that's your combined total of the bank balance, if you were to pull the bank statement of Illinois funds as of January 2025, which is about $8 million combined.
So you're saying you're gonna pull from the enterprise fund and then motor fuel. You have there's money in there, there's $1.5 million in Illinois funds and the motor fuel tax,
Yes,
which is to be used for roads and
yes,
stuff like that.
yes.
Yeah, so we had $1 million.
You have $1.5 million that you can use for street improvements on eligible MFT items.
That's wondering.
This week I talked to Tony and I talked to Warren, and I was getting some, you know, they always say if you don't ask a question, so I came up to them gentlemen right there. And I didn't notice, I thought Brady was about as flat as a pancake. So he told me from the water department to the south end of town is 14 feet.
Yep.
There's a difference of 14 feet.
Yep.
I'm not an engineer, but I know when you have to push water 14 feet taller, you know, your pressure goes down. So they were talking about installing more water treatment plants on the south side of town to alleviate the problem. Well, I think he was saying it's $5 or $6 million. And if Tony what I heard him say, if you can correct me, is if you have to fix one, you have to have 2 new ones or something, you have to have multiple put back in to subsidize some kind of thing, whatever, I don't know, that's it. But they were saying that the one at the other side, they're gonna put at least one down the other end of town, and it's $5 or $6 million. Well, $5 or $6 million, it's nice to have $5 million in the bank, because if you're 2 million in the hole like we used to be, you can't put a water treatment plant in, which helps this whole town on that side of town, because I live in the middle, so, but you got guys that live at the other end of town, and the water pressure is low because of the situation, and then we had the water tower problem, and then they showed all that, you know, Warren went through that scenario, like, you gotta have half the water, half a tank, or so, whatever the dimension.
Yeah, we got
You have to balance, but to have a water treatment plant have to come in, because if that tech center goes in, they're gonna be, you know, so to have this money sit in the bank,
If I understand things correctly, when and if that water treatment plant, we'll work with engineers to find out all the capabilities, what can we do? And we're looking at that end of town because it'd be a good avenue. But that would be probably through an EPA loan at 1%. And anybody that's in business, if you can get a note at 1% and make the payments on it, rather than take your cash out, you would take the 1% note.
Yeah, I would recommend, if 1% loan is getting 5, I would.
Use their money.
Right.
well, you have the money in there to pay the
Yes.
make the payments. I know what you're saying,
Yeah.
take the loan, don't use all your money,
Right.
make the payments, would you already have the money in the account?
Be conservative with the funds, yes.
And I get that, but my whole point with this motor fuel tax is bugging me right now. Because we still have a street, which one is it, 3rd Street we were going down? That's half concrete and half gravel.
I believe they're waiting for the weather to break. Do I
It's been that way for
It's been,
years.
yeah, it's not just happened.
Oh, I just noticed it
Yeah,
this year
no,
where
it's-
they widened it. I know it was bumpy last year, but you guys.
No,
laid
it's
the
gravel.
That's on, that's gonna be done this spring and summer.
So
We're gonna
with
widen it.
MFT funds, you can't just go using it, you have to use it for eligible MFT items, which that would be classified as an eligible MFT. But you must first ask MFT, or excuse me, IDOT, for permission to say, this is the project we wanna use. Once IDOT gives you your blessing, then you can go and cut the check for that work. But it's IDOT first has to approve it before you can actually spend the money.
Okay, and that's fine, but the money's here, we could have asked IDOT, and we could have done more roads that are worse than what were done.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but, prior to us being in here, the MFT was not balanced for 6 years prior.
Okay, that's
Six, please.
past, Tony, I'm talking about past, this is here.
And it all leads up to current. Up until this last year, it took the attorneys and the engineers that long to get work with IDOT to find out how much money we actually have before we can spend it. So trust me, would we rather fix roads or have money in the account? We'd rather fix roads. But due to all the negligence prior to us, it took us 5 years to find out exactly what money in our account was actually MFT. That was just this last year. And right now, I think, what do we have? We have approximately 600,000 gonna be in the budget for this year for roads. But of course, we gotta ask them first, so we use both. We have the road funds in the street department, which we don't need their blessings for. We have the MFT, which is more expensive to do because we have to go on a different, line for bids and everything. But we also are working on getting the blessings from IDOT.
But IDOT wasn't letting us use those funds until that,
Correct.
everything was organized and
We weren't able
detailed.
to.
Until
So
we
what
had,
date did you find out?
I can't give you the exact date.
Well,
It was
General month?
approximately 6 months ago. It was still in 24 when and I don't think it's totally finished yet.
And if
Because-
I understand everything, when we did find out that money was available, we started making a plan to take care of streets that Dale and his crew took care of. Now it's on the books to take care of some more this year according to MFT and what we're allowed to do.
When the engineer gets here tonight, we can ask him if they have it all squared away.
Yep.
They had to put one person exclusively on ours because it was so screwed up that, they were using MFT fund for 4 or 5 years without zero approval. And the state said, you got two choices. You either get this figured out and get us everything we want, or we take all your MFT money away. And I personally don't think it's all the way done yet, but I think it's an inch away from it.
And I'd rely on our construction and road guys, but if we put out for MFT in June or July, I would believe that we'd have little success getting construction companies to commit to projects because they're completely wiped out for the year and spilling over into the spring. Now is normally the time that the MFT projects are approved so that you can get them out for bid early spring and then they have the summer and fall to complete it.
It's kind of the same thing. Everything sounds great on paper, but when you get behind the scenes and you actually have to do it yourself, it doesn't flow like that. You can't get business in here in 6 months. You can't get a road done in 6 months. Everything takes a ridiculous amount of time. If it's got an initial, it takes time. IDOT, EPA, you name it, they all take a lot of time.
that's all well and good, but why does only one person knows that they're gonna put water treatment plants at South End of town, or South
We
End of town?
discussed this at council meetings over a year ago
Yeah.
with the old engineer Dave Weber. He who has the water wins was his statement, was in the paper.
I've been to most of them, and
Actually, 2 years ago, we had to approve the expenditure of water research
Right.
to start the water plant, with all the process going, which takes approximately 4 to 5 years to complete. And I know it's been at least 3 times out for discussion with the attorney, because we've asked him what the updates are. Engineer.
you're on the
Question.
hot seat. You're on the hot seat.
Our engineer Sean,
Nice job.
and, when this all started a couple of years ago, we made it aware to the public, we talked about it at the council meetings, we had Dave Weber talk about it before he transferred out of state, Sean came on board. This has been a process for,
Okay,
Wow.
but here, it's, if it's been sitting there, why don't we get updates? You said 2 or 3 years ago, it's now?
what's the
You just
updates,
said,
Tony?
Well, the updates are, they're still finishing studies. The second thing is we had to have land to put it on.
Right,
The studies are extensive. I don't understand why they're so extensive, but they are. EPA is starting to require more above ground storage for water, so we have options of, like our Eureka Street Tower that should just be taken down.
right.
Either spend $1 million on that, $5 million on our old plant, or go ahead and work on a new plant. The problem with the new plant is the place to put it in, and the new data center that's coming to us for going is gonna donate 4 to 5 acres to put it on. But now it has to do all the studies, and then after the studies, you gotta give it to EPA, the IEPA, each one of them takes 6 months to a year to give you an answer.
And I believe that, and I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I guess it's because I can hear him, that, I'm not even going there.
Well,
I'm not
when we
going
started with the project, the engineer says, just so you
there.
guys
Tony,
know.
could I hear from Warren?
When we started on this project, the engineers did say, just so you know, this is gonna take years. I think we've had conversation with them maybe twice with no updates. We are waiting patiently for the standard operating procedures of finding out all the information, where it's gonna be, are we gonna get this property, how much is it gonna cost, and like we talked about, when you're dealing with the EPA or any of these initials, nothing happens fast. When we get updates, we're telling you about it. We don't hide anything. This is the most transparent council that you can find in the area, and we can validate everything we're saying. They contact us, if there's updates, we're gonna let you know, but if we don't have updates, we're not gonna make something up.
All right, why don't we have one more question? Liz, you said one question, it's turned into a lot, we can continue this, later. I just want Chris to get through
Yeah.
this thing. But real quick, in the back, if you have,
This is off the topic that you guys are discussing, but I wanted to get my question in before this was done. If somebody wanted to do a forensic audit for the last 6 years, how much would that cost?
I would say conservative, and so I had clients who've had them done, and we were requesting proposals, about 4 or 5 years back, and for a size like you guys, they were talking back then, at least 6 figures to $150,000 to $200,000.
And how long will it take?
Usually, I've gone through it, once, it took from start to finish about a year.
And it's 400 and, you said
Up to, I would say conservative, 4 years ago,
Yeah, they start at about 120-something thousand.
I would say
And
about
up
100 to
depending on the
200,000
size of the
minimum,
entity, yeah.
and that was 4 years ago.
Is that for 1 year or 4 years?
That'd be for 1 year.
Mhm.
And what do you think that would actually accomplish versus what you've already produced and what you keep doing?
So what a forensic audit does is they come in and say, okay, what is your guys' process? So if your process is A, B, and C, we will confirm that you're doing A, B, and C. If you guys are saying, okay, we are purchasing for X, Y, and Z for the police department, they'll confirm we're purchasing A, B, and C for the police department, and those are legitimate police expenses. That is the extent of what a forensic audit does. What a forensic audit does is confirm that you guys are following your guys' procedures.
So
And
it doesn't go line item by line?
if you want to go line item by line, where you would review every single transaction down to all of the support, that is a very extensive and very time-consuming process. And it would be, what are you looking for? The very first question the forensic auditor is going to ask you is, what are you looking for?
Well, people in this town accuse every person sitting up there that they are thieves and liars and crooks.
And they want a forensic audit. We're
Yes.
wondering how much they're gonna have to pay to have this forensic audit done.
Depends on what they're looking for.
It depends on to what
They're
it's.
looking for, they're saying you guys are stealing.
Yeah.
9
It will
million in
co-
the bank, I don't think they're stealing,
I
sorry.
agree with every
But,
person up there.
and all the conversation I've heard is, today's market, what he was talking 4 years ago, we're looking at a ballpark of 200 grand to start with, on a minimum, I would speculate.
And a year.
I'm just trying to clarify this in my head. So, unless there is truly theft, a forensic audit is a very large expense on a city that really will produce no benefit unless they're able to root out a very specific area of corruption. Am I understanding correctly? So it's
Yes.
like, hey, we'll take our money because I'm gonna be petty?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the way I understand it too. Very good summation.
Well, we've got about 10 minutes.
Okay, well, first off, the lady on the far right, you wanna know something, she's got it, she knows it. You need a question, you got an answer, she'll get it to you. My question was, just to go back on that tip, just quick, because a lot of people don't understand what TIF really meant, we were going through that situation. Who controls the TIF, and how much can the TIF actually, say the police department needed, is there a percentage of what the TIF money can actually give to a department? Say you got $100,000 in TIF, and say, well, the car costs $50,000, and you said 38%, okay? So that's whatever, 38% of $50,000, whatever. Is there any other balances, or who controls the TIF, or is that a council thing?
No, so under the TIF, if you're doing that where you're trying to take a proportionate, then it's the 38% is what the city is using. But let's say you were repaving that entire road in that TIF district. Theoretically, that entire road is within your TIF district, so that can all be paid out of TIF funds. Because under the TIF Act, if it's within your TIF district, it is completely a TIF eligible expense. But when you're looking at TIF expenses, you also have to look at what do you have as your redevelopment agreement. In the dealership agreement, part of the redevelopment agreement is a reimbursement of sales tax. That would all be, because that business is within this TIF district, those would be all TIF eligible expenses. So, simple example, $100,000 in sales tax as a reimbursement, you could pay it all out of TIF money because it's all within the TIF district. It all depends on, TIF district is controlled by primarily the TIF Act. Then secondary is the city council. But the primary thing that controls the uses of TIF funds is the TIF Act. That is what controls the primarily of TIF money, because there is a specific section of the Illinois code that is for the TIFs. And TIF stands for Tax Increment Financing District, for those, in case you don't know where it is, that's what the acronym stands for.
So what you're saying is that if you were gonna manage your money financially correct, you could take all the sales tax, put it in the general fund, cause you could spend whatever on it, and use the TIF funds to make the payments on that.
Yes, that's the way I would recommend doing it. Because you get the money out of the general.
So we'd be able to take that $160,000, put it towards something else in the city instead of using it, cause if we don't use the money in TIF, at the end, it gets turned over to the state.
Yes, once the TIF closes, you have to do anything that's left over in the TIF fund, you have to, return back to Will County, and then Will County will distribute it accordingly to each of the taxing bodies within the TIF district.
So Chris, how many years have you been reviewing our funds, and what would be your expert opinion about how well we're doing?
So I've been the primary on the city for FY23 was, I think, my first year with you guys. We as a firm have been here a lot longer than that. You guys run one of a more profitable benefit. I don't want to say profitable, but financially sound, because profitable, you guys, the city, other than the water fund, the city does not operate on a for-profit business. Because the city is a governmental entity. The governmental entity does not work to make a profit. But from a financial standpoint, you guys run on a beneficial, all your funds, for the most part, run positive.
And so that helps us plan for future improvements, like we're talking about on the water. In addition to that, I think I lost my thought. When we're getting the good funds, is there, here's my thought, is we list our expenses every council meeting. we have them in the public, forum, wouldn't that show indications if there was any kind of mismanagement of money?
Yes, that would be that is the quickest way to find items like that, because those are, the majority of your guys' items are reflected on there, so you pay all your vendors and those are all reported through your guys' packets.
And all of us members on the council get to review that, all the public gets to review that. It's out there for at least 3 to 4 days before the meeting. And certainly the finance, commissioner would be on top of that, fully. And if we had any questions, we could raise them. And anybody that, comes to, or just is interested in the government, they could look at those figures and say, oh, I didn't think that expense was, an appropriate type of expense. You can always come and ask these questions, and then nobody's ever asked them, but we've been looking at it. Thank you.
Hey Dale, I know I was talking to Tony about it, and I know you're the streets guy, and the question was, I've heard a couple times with the car dealerships, and Tony explained to me, well, when Jewel went in, Diamond had to pay for all the infrastructure, the sewer, the streets, they had to pay for it all. When I was talking to Tony, he said the car dealerships are taking care of all the streets, the sewers and all that. So none of the money, so people understand, when these bills get put in, the city of Braidwood puts zero money into putting them dealerships in, and people think, well, we gotta pay, we're not. Tony told me that they're taken care of because they bring in a company that covers it. And probably $400,000 or $500,000 probably, and that's probably a small ball of what it is. But people don't understand that, well, that's gonna be up. As Tony explained, they're doing their own work, because we're not a big enough town to do that, you know?
So
people don't understand that.
I wanna add one note. One of the things that with the dealership was that the city would upfront the purchase of the land, and then the dealership would repay the city for the cost of that. If you go to page 15 of the financials, the way we set that up is that the expense of the principal and interest on that loan is reflected as an expense. So you'll notice that as of January 2025, the city has incurred $118,000 of expenses, but that we've collected in revenue $387,000. That was the prior years of the dealership paying for the principal and interest that the city had paid. Because the process is, once a year, the dealership will get an invoice, so to speak, saying, hey, this is what we've paid on the principal and interest on the loan that we bought to purchase the property, reimburse us for that loan. So that's what the $387,000 is. So what the city does is, they upfront it, so to speak, and then the dealership will pay a check back to the city for the portion of the principal and interest that they paid on the loan.
Chris, I know we're getting run out of time over here. Yeah. We held a meet the candidates on Sunday, and again, thank you for all the candidates that showed up. One of the issues brought up by one of the candidates for the other candidate for mayor was that he was gonna immediately get a forensic audit in place. Now, forensic audits and financial audits are two different types of audits, correct?
Yes.
Could you just one more time, so that everybody understands what a forensic audit does and looks for, as opposed to what a financial audit, which the city gets for the fiscal year?
So a financial audit, what that is it comes in and looks at your guys' books for any material mistakes in a high level aspect. So they confirm that if you say that your balance is $1 million in cash, do you have $1 million in cash? It may be $1,100,000 or $1,001,000. But as long as it's within $1 million, a financial auditor will say, okay, that makes sense. It's not looking down to the penny, because no auditor, no accounting firm will go down to the penny, because the cost of it is it's not worth the benefit. It's a very high cost for a very low benefit, if you're trying to go down to a penny.
Not cost effective.
Yes.
Is it very rare that municipalities have a forensic audit?
Yes,
Does sometimes the state come in and have one?
No, the state, what they would do is they may force the local government to hire a forensic auditor, and then the state will pay the forensic auditor, and then the local government has to pay the state. But in my experience, I've never seen I think I've only seen 2 or 3 forensic audits in my career. Not
It's
even
10
that.
years,
Yeah.
over 10 years.
Some questions.
But let me finish your question. A forensic audit, on the other hand, that is coming in and basically testing, you say this is your process A, B, and C, pull all of the support, and then I will look at those support to see if you are following that. It takes more time because it's line by line by line of looking at the support, and it's extremely time consuming because if you're trying to do everything, you're spending a lot of money for,
And time.
yeah, a lot of money and time for a very low return.
So for example, if I'm doing a forensic audit and I wanna audit the process for paying bills, approving invoices and paying bills. What does the forensic audit, would it look at first? Is it gonna look at every line item, how the bill's paid? Or is it gonna look at, this is the process, this invoice was submitted, it was approved by whoever needed to be approved, you know, ran through the check processing and was approved and signed, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, it would do that, and depending on what your threshold, if you said you want every single invoice, or if you said any invoice over 1,000, it depends on what the threshold you wanna set.
So it's more process than financial.
Yeah.
To put it in layman's terms for all of us that are not
Smart.
an accountant. On a scale of 1 to 10, how financially sound is our city?
I would say 10. You guys operate well. From everything I see from on the books end and on the financial side, you guys operate well. Now, that is on the financial aspect. I can speak on that side of things. So from everything I see from finance-wise, you guys operate very well as a city.
Thank you.
Was there anything you wanted to cover in the presentation there, Chris, or you?
I will say, just, if you guys go to page 18, that is the city's expenses that's incurred by department compared to its budget. So like administration, as of January 2025, the city has expended 45% of its budget. Development, they spent 80% of its budget. Street department, 100% of its budget. Police department, a little less than 80%,
And this is as of what date?
as of January 2025.
That's with 3 months left, or whatever, right?
Yeah, with 3 months remaining of the fiscal year. The next page is the different types of revenues of the city consolidated compared to budget, compared to prior year, and then the difference. And then at the bottom is a pie chart as to where the majority of the city's money come from. So you'll notice that 48% of the city's revenues for the general fund is other taxes, non-property taxes.
Just say you had 100,000 for the police fund, just for group, and you use 80,000. The other 20,000, then go back into the general fund for next, I mean, how,
So,
does that work? Does it work?
budgets work off of fiscal year. At the end of the fiscal year, whatever leftover funds exist are elapsed. You don't get to carry over into the following fiscal year from a budgetary standpoint.
Well, I mean, no, where does it go? I mean, just say you have 20,000, where does it go if you don't use it?
It stays in the general, if it's general fund money, it stays in the general fund. If it's water money, it stays in the water fund. It depends on whatever the original source of that revenue stream was.
Just wanna know where.
But where does it sit? If there's a surplus of money in the general account, we'll transfer it into our interest-bearing account.
Yeah.
We're making money on it.
That's it, I'm gonna thank everybody for coming.
Well done, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks everybody for coming, we'll have about a 5-minute break.
I need a motion.
3 minutes.
I'll make a motion
break?
to adjourn the meeting first.
I need a
I'll make a
motion.
motion to adjourn the meeting.
Who wants?
Second that.
Commissioner Erling. Commissioner Weeding.
Yes.
Commissioner Walsh.
Yes.
Commissioner Wozak.
Yes.
Mayor Hart.
Yes.
We have adjourned.